Welcome to the Big Movement Podcast. If you're ready to create results and make huge strides in your business, finances, personal development, and health, then you're in the right place. Pushing past excuses and powering through procrastination can be a challenge alone. Here, you'll get the support, tools, and knowledge you need to get to the level you desire in your business and life. Let's get started with your host, Byron Ingram.
And welcome to another episode of the Big Movement Podcast. Today we have a special guest. We have Michelle Budd, who is a Chinese face reading practitioner, a 9-star key energy interpreter, and master coach trained in NLP and hypnosis. She focuses in on helping people read facial expressions, facial patterns, facial intelligence that we need in communication so we can be able to communicate our messages more effectively with our prospects out there. So let's learn a little bit more about how we can improve our communication skills through face reading with Michelle. So, Michelle, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Byron.
Oh, glad to have you here. So now, how in the world did you get into facial intelligence? I mean, obviously, since we all have faces, but what made you decide to go into it?
You know, I have been a coach for a long time, and I studied NLP and hypnosis and all of those great things. But I've always been fascinated with communication. In university, I was a linguistics major, so I always looked at how we communicate. And one of the first things you learn in NLP training is that most of the communication out there is nonverbal, and I've always been a people watcher. So when I started coaching people, I realized there was oftentimes lots of things that they weren't saying, and I wasn't able to help them because I couldn't find the root. It took a lot of digging, and I thought there has to be another tool that I could use to help me get to what it is they're not saying faster or more effectively, or in a way that showed how much I understood who they were and where they were coming from. And so I went to my favorite place in the world for inspiration, which is a bookstore. You guys have Barnes & Noble. We have Chapters here. And I was wandering around, and I happened across a book on face reading. And so I picked it up, and I brought it home. And as soon as I read it, I realized that that was my missing piece, that we give people a way to communicate with us without even realizing that we do. And if you can understand the language of the face, then you can understand who someone is, how they behave, what their patterns are, and even how life has been treating them in order to help them or relate to them or work with them. And so I just went on a quest to study it for 2 or 3 years, and then added it to my practice and combined the Chinese face reading with all of the other skills that I had in terms of linguistics and body language and NLP to create the facial intelligence platform that I use now with my clients and people.
Oh, now that's fascinating in terms of being able to communicate with people that way, as I think it's something that's underutilized in today's world. So now, when you picked up this book, what was that aha that you had as you're reading, like, oh, well, this makes sense? What was it that jumped out at you about facial reading?
You know, what's really interesting is that I realized that there are places on the face that, or things about each and every one of us that we look at when we look in the mirror and we think, oh my God, I wish I didn't have those. And, you know, if I use myself as an example, one of the things that I had read about was natural shadowing under the eyes. And so I've had that my whole life. And people will say, oh my gosh, you're tired, or you're not sleeping enough, or all of these things. But there are people who naturally are just born that way. They have shadowing under their eyes from the time they're little. It may change slightly depending on their sleep patterns or hydration or other things, but some people naturally have it all the time. And it was one of those things that I would look in the mirror all the time and think, oh my God, I can't invest in any more concealer. I can't. And I realized this means something, and it means something really valuable about who I am, and it's an aspect of my personality. And so now I look at that shadowing as part of me as opposed to something I don't like. It's a message in the mirror that says you have really deep thinking, you're really creative, you can, all of these other things that there's a laundry list of things that shadowing under the eyes can mean, but not just you need to sleep more. So for me, that was the beginning of understanding myself in a whole new way. And then when I was able to look at every feature and then features that other people had that were strong, and it opened my eyes to seeing people's souls as opposed to their faces.
Now that's fascinating because just like you said there, people have this mindset of this idea that, oh, there's dark circles, you're always tired. But what other types of misconceptions are there in terms of common features where people just assume like, oh, this person must be blank?
Well, one of the things that I think, especially in our society, that I think is really misunderstood are wrinkles. We have a $1 billion plastic surgery and, Botox in industry these days. The people are always trying to eliminate their wrinkles or get rid of them. And there are different types of wrinkles and they mean different things, and they don't just necessarily mean age. Wrinkles are formed as a result of making a repeated expression on your face, and it gets carved into your face because of an expression you're making, and that expression is attached to an emotion and a way of thinking. And so just by filling in the wrinkle doesn't mean that you've released the emotional pattern that causes you to make that expression all the time, or that you've changed your way of thinking. And so that's why none of those procedures are permanent, because unless we change our habits or our emotional responses to things or how we feel and think, we're still going to continue to have the outward manifestation of that thinking and feeling in one way or another. And so when you understand where your wrinkles are coming from based on what you're thinking and feeling, then you can look at them differently, or you can almost change them without having to pay the plastic surgeon to do it for you.
Now, that's interesting because that's something you typically don't hear from people. It's, especially in the medical industry, it's, oh, well, come back in 90 days, we'll give you another treatment, and that's pretty much it. Instead of, let's scale it back, peel back the layers, and find out what's the cause of it and address it.
Yeah, and I mean, we all age and we do lose collagen and all of those things, but if you're not, it's almost like, I don't know if you had this, but when you're a kid and your mother says, don't make that face, your face will stay that way. We make expressions. We have habits that we express that all of our emotions are translated physically in some way. And very often it's in the face, in our response to each other and our circumstances. And eventually, when you have a habit of behavior, it's going to start becoming a permanent part of your story, and so it'll show up one way or another in your face, whether it's a thinning or a change in a feature in particular, or it's a wrinkle. And when you understand that, then you have some power to change that on your own without having to go the surgical route or the Botox route.
So now, with that, because I'm sure there's people listening and they're wondering, ooh, this could save me some money here, where they're just getting excited, like they're just leaning in. If someone starts addressing the emotional issues, the thoughts and things that are the triggers behind the wrinkles, how does it start manifesting itself in that change where, like, when you're working with people, you can start seeing that they've changed their emotions? Do you start seeing a change in, like, wrinkles and patterns on their face?
There are some that definitely can change, yes, and some that disappear, or they come back based on your emotional state. So it's a good gauge of understanding where someone is at and when they come in and out of habits that serve them and that don't serve them. I often see that with clients. But for me, I think the piece that I love about it is that it gives you an understanding of people, because there's a lot of, when we see wrinkles, we see sometimes people's pain, and we aren't a society that loves pain. So we try to do everything we can to avoid it. And even by saying, oh, get those filled, you'll look so much better. Part of it is that then we don't have to look at it, because that person doesn't see themselves all the time. We only see ourselves when we look in the mirror for the most part. It's other people that are looking at us and judging those wrinkles and not wanting to see or recognize or resonate with our pain. And so for me, when I see someone who might have, deep wrinkles going down their face, around their eyes, I think, oh, wow, that person's gone through some grieving. I wonder what has happened, and I want to understand their story and have some compassion for them instead of saying, oh, wow, I don't want to look at your grief, so please fill it for me so that I don't have to feel it by being human. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. And I think it's a greater problem that we have out there is that people are doing stuff because of the perception of others instead of what is it they need to be doing for themselves in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And then, so for example, if you see someone with really kind of pronounced vertical lines coming down the corners of their eyes, not the crow's feet kind of joy lines, but deep lines that come down, that you can feel the sadness, you can feel the grief. And so if that person is looking in the mirror and thinking, oh, this is age and I need to Botox this away, instead of understanding, wow, I'm kind of stuck in grief. I'm making these expressions of grief a lot. So do I have a loss that is that deep and part of my story and I want other people to see? Then yes, I will own that. Or do I have a loss that I'm stuck in and that I'm not moving past, and maybe I need some help to understand how to move past that, or because I don't want to feel this way all the time. I want to see more joy on my face and less grief. And so when you can begin to see what those features and wrinkles on your face mean, you have a choice as to how you want to deal with them. If Botox is your route to make you feel better, more power to you, but it's not going to necessarily change that unless you begin to change how you're feeling and how you're thinking. So there's so much opportunity to understand yourself and understand other people by just seeing the differences and the changes in our faces.
Right. And that's so important to take the time to see those changes, because it all is valuable. It's priceless when you think about it. So now when it comes to just the communication aspects of when you're talking to people, what is it that people should be focusing in on when they're looking at people's facial expressions?
Well, it depends on what your intent is on the conversation or the communication. So, for example, if you are in business and you're looking to work with other people or sell to them or partner with them, there are different places that you can look at on the face. Everything on the face has meaning. But, for example, one that I really like to use because it's easy to see is people's eyebrows. Eyebrows mean many, many things, but one of the things that they tell us is how somebody makes their decisions. So what filter they put their decision-making process through in order to decide whether or not they're going to buy from you or agree to go on a date with you or, all these other things. So that's one place that's very easy to see and look at. And so, for example, if someone has really straight, thick eyebrows, then they're a really logical thinker. They want to make decisions based on the logic of something. So if you're going to ask them to buy from you, or if you're coming up to them and you're having a conversation around business, you want to make sure that you give them the 1, 2, 3, not the 1ZX formula for how to do things. You really want to present all aspects of things in a really logical, succinct way, because that's the filter through which they decide things.
Right.
Somebody else has a different filter based on their eyebrow shape. And
right. So then, along the same lines, what about, because there's a lot of women here, especially in the States, that trim and pluck their eyebrows. What about those? Since they kind of all have that same look to them, they're no longer like thick and full. They're kind of just this straight line.
Yeah, well, that's part of the thing, especially for women, is to follow. One great thing to do is follow the natural line of your eyebrows, because if you have naturally curved eyebrows and all of a sudden you're following one of the Kardashians and putting a peak in, then that's going to change how you make decisions. It's going to change how reactive you are. And you're going to be behaving in a different way, because what happens on the outside reflects on the inside. It's not one or the other. They're very connected. So all of a sudden, if you're a really logical decision maker and you put a peak in your eyebrows, you're going to start making reactive decisions, and that may not serve you, especially because it's not your natural pattern. But when you look in the mirror, you're thinking unconsciously, oh, wow, I could be more reactive here. And you're not trained that way. If someone has a natural peak in their eyebrows, then they've been making decisions that way their whole life. So it's a natural state of being. So that's one of the cautions in terms of using things like waxing and all of those plucking things.
So now, how is that possible? Because some people might be thinking, wait, changing the look of this one thing is going to affect who I am on the inside. How does that work?
Well, it's everything's connected energetically. So when you feel a certain way, then that feeling has to be expressed somehow in the physical world. So it may come out as tears. It may come out as a change in your face. It may come out in a, jumping for joy. But there's always a connection between our physical and our emotional state. And it doesn't just go one way. So because we have physical responses to things that we see or external stimuli. So things on the outside affect the inside. Things on the inside affect the outside. It's just the order of who we are.
Right. That's just fascinating to me because, there's people would necessarily think about in that day-to-day living with communication patterns if they change the look of, say, the eyebrows. Because normally, in terms of perception, someone's thinking, well, if I wear a different set of clothes or things like that, or they're wearing a hat one day, it has an impact.
Yep. Yeah.
But down to that level, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's the same notion. And men have the same opportunities in a way because they, what we can do with makeup for the most part, or plucking and waxing, you can do with growing a mustache, a beard, a goatee. They have an impact on how you're presented and how other people will unconsciously and consciously perceive you, as well as how you're going to shift your emotional state based on those additions that you naturally grow or choose not to grow.
Right. So since you brought up the whole notion, like you have mustaches and beards, how is that interpreted? Because you hear different things in terms of success that people will say that, if you have a beard, you have to shave it off, otherwise you're not going to have as much success. What are your thoughts on those things?
Well, I think beards in general, for in terms of face reading and facial intelligence, they represent adding more of the warrior energy to the face. So essentially, when you grow a beard, you enhance the jawline, you accentuate it. And so that can make someone more confident, more driven, more aggressive, more competitive, more athletic, more, have more drive. And so if you're someone who without the beard has a really weak jaw, not a strong chiseled jawline, then growing a beard could essentially help you. It could shore up that energy, make you someone who's more driven and action oriented and all of that energy. If you already have a strong jawline underneath the beard and strong eyebrows and lots of squareness to your face, then adding the beard could potentially add more aggression, so tip the balance. So it's understanding who the person wants to be and where they were at before, and then what they need. Because oftentimes I'll see that men who don't have strong jaws, but all of a sudden are now out of school and into the professional world and need to have a little bit more action-oriented things, or maybe they're going into athletics and they need to be more driven and competitive, then they'll grow those beards. And part of the rationale consciously is that, it's one less thing to think about, one less thing to worry about. I'm focusing here on other things. But what it does do as well is it gives them more of that energy of competitiveness and action taking. And so it depends on who you are and then who you want to be.
Right, exactly. It's just fascinating because you see more and more trends today with people wanting to have beards. From TV commercials showing, here, take care of your beard, where there's a time that you just wouldn't see that. Everything was, you must be clean shaven all the time.
Yeah, but you know what's really interesting too, Byron, is that at the time, if you look at the trends in terms of even men and women, there's an interesting dynamic that happens there. Because right now, the trend in eyebrows for women, so eyebrows have the same kind of, for enhancing your eyebrows for women has the same effect as growing a beard for men, essentially, in terms of the energetics and the meaning of the features. And so we're now at a time where women are actually enhancing their eyebrows, making them really thick. If you look at like Jennifer Lopez or the Kardashians, really thick, strong, exaggeratedly big eyebrows. We're not at the time where they're thin little pencil lines anymore. And it's almost then, as women in doing that are shoring up their action taking, their competitive edge, their desire to be more self-confident and self-aware and all of these things, then men are growing beards more. So it's like, oh, well, you can't be as strong as we are, so we're going to add some beard here so we can keep up with the energy of you becoming more warriors. It's very interesting because when women have really thin eyebrows and they're a little bit more passive, then men can have clean-shaven faces and they don't have to worry about more action-taking, aggressive women.
Now that is truly interesting because it's something you never would have thought about, that here's this correlation between women having fuller eyebrows as a movement and then this fascinating with men to start growing beards more and more, for it to be more commonplace than it was in the past where everyone had to be clean shaven versus now it's like, where's your manly beard?
Yeah, and it's very interesting. And even from a society perspective, there's like the influences. I think there's Game of Thrones, which, you know, that Jon Snow kind of thing where everybody's like, oh, he's so manly, so he has a beard, we should all grow beards. But also we're more of a technology culture where we're sitting a lot more and we're not taking as much action, but you grow the beard and there's this unconscious desire to be an action taker or to be more active. And so it might be also, you know, counteracting some of what we've been developing in society as a more passive, sedentary existence.
Right, exactly. That's key. It's overcoming that sedentary lifestyle that comes with so much in technology today, where in the past it was logical. It was just part of that day-to-day routine. You're going to be active. You think about society as a whole of how we go from being physically active consistently to where it's sedentary. I think here's a great example. If you think about it, there's a time that if you were to think about, let's say, joining a gym, people thought, are you crazy? Why would you do that? Because there was no need, because everybody had, for the most part, a physical intensive lifestyle. Versus now, for many people, the only way they're getting physical exertion is to go to the gym.
Yeah.
Where things change dramatically that way. So obviously when it comes to growing a business, what are those key things that people should be looking for in facial expressions? And I wouldn't say in terms of manipulating the conversation, but let's say to influence it to their favor. What should they be focusing on their side, but also with the person they're talking to?
Well, I think what's really important, and I think where I really started with this work, was when you can look in the mirror and understand who you are and how you do things, then you can understand why you are doing the work that you're doing, but also how you present yourself. And when you look at someone else and see that they're different, then you can begin to say, okay, well, I need to talk to them in a way that resonates with them instead of the way that resonates with me. So I kind of call it the platinum rule. So we all know the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would like to be done unto. But that really isn't the way we work as human beings, because you don't want me to treat you the way I want to be treated. You want me to treat you the way you want to be treated. And there has to be a way inherently that we can understand that. And what we don't realize is that we give that gift to each other by our faces, because our faces say, hey, this is who I am. This is how I move through the world. If you can read me, then you can give me the platinum rule, which is you can do unto me the way I want to be done unto, so that then I will reciprocate for you. So
Now,
that's the way I like to look at the work.
Okay. So that obviously is important for people to put out the right energy that they want to attract. What is it people should be mindful of with their own facial expressions when they go out into the world?
Well, the work that I do is really not necessarily so much about expressions. It's about understanding other people's features. So, for example, if we go back to a business scenario and we take eyebrows again. So if I have really rounded eyebrows, then the way that I make decisions is that I need to make sure that if you're presenting something to me, that it makes sense for all the people involved in the scenario. So I'm not necessarily just a logical thinker. I am someone who needs to make sure that everything that you're presenting is going to be good for my family, for the people in my company, for all the people involved. Very much a people-centered decision maker. So if you're someone who has really straight eyebrows, then you're a logical thinker. So you're going to think, okay, if I just go up to her and give her all the logic, the A, B, C, D, and E about why this is cost effective and makes sense and all of these things, then she's got to buy, because that's how I bought this product. That's how I was sold on this thing. And so that's where the understanding of yourself and others comes into play, because if you have those straight eyebrows and you realize you're a logical thinker, but you know facial intelligence and you know that I, with rounded eyebrows, am not a logical thinker, I need to understand from a perspective of people-centeredness, then you're going to say, okay, I see her eyebrows, they're rounded, so I can't go plan A, B, C, D with her. I need to go over and say, hey, we've got this great thing. It will save you time. You can spend more time with your family. You'll have extra money so you can go on vacations. And, you know, all the things that would appeal to someone who puts people above logic. And then you could potentially make the sale or make a connection with somebody that you wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. So that's the whole platinum rule concept, and how you can use the work to change not who you are, but to change the way you present based on what somebody else needs to hear and understand in order to build a relationship with you.
And that's important, because people have to know how they're coming across with the people in their world. And I think that's something that is often misunderstood, because people assume that they have to be like somebody else instead of defining their own path and understanding who they are so they come across the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in personal relationships, but all relationships, we think that because we get along with somebody, that then they think and feel like us. But that isn't necessarily true. And so when you can understand how somebody else might be potentially thinking and feeling, then you can present whatever it is that you want to show them or have resonance with in a way that gets you into alignment with the way they think and feel. So then they'll be on board, or they'll be more open to understanding how you think and feel. And so, you know, even though you can be with somebody for a year and like the same things, you may totally like them for different reasons. But unless you understand those reasons, then at some point there'll be dissonance.
Well, that's interesting in terms of the understanding. So when it comes to relationships in general, what is it people should be focusing in on so they're not misreading people? Because I think when it comes down to why a lot of relationships fail, it's communication. Mm-hmm. But then to make it more effective, what should someone be looking at so they're not getting the wrong message? Like, well, I thought you liked this, but her facial expressions were saying something entirely different.
Well, there's lots of things, you know, for example, especially in relationship, if someone has a naturally full mouth, so fuller lips, they naturally speak the language of relationship. They're inherently a nurturer, inherently caring, inherently understanding of other people. And so relationships are easier for them. But that doesn't mean that someone who has thinner, smaller lips, they don't want relationships or they don't want to be in relationship. It just means that they don't naturally speak that language. So it's like they're speaking their second language in relationship all the time. So it's harder for them. So someone who has thinner lips might not always be as thoughtful or as nurturing as someone who has fuller lips. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to be in relationship or they can't be. It just means it's harder. And so when you understand that about different people, it doesn't mean that you can't fall in love with someone who doesn't have a nice full mouth. It's, if you do, it just means that, okay, it's going to be more work for them. And so what comes easily to me isn't going to come easily to them. And so if I begin getting frustrated because they don't understand me or they don't want to make me soup when I'm sick, then they're not worth my time. It just means that it's not their first language. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yes. So all those things are important. So someone doesn't, if relationships is not, let's say, their primary language, how do you effectively communicate with them if you're wanting to build a relationship?
Well, then you understand what their primary language is, and then understand part of it is then telling them what your needs are. Because sometimes we think, well, this is just natural to me, so why isn't it natural to them? And it's saying, you know what, I know that it's not your first instinct to bring me soup when I say I'm not feeling well, but I would really love it if you would, and that would really be appreciated. And the other person may think, oh, I never thought of that, but I care for her, so of course I'll do that. Whereas if he is stressed out, he needs to go play basketball with his friends, even though you were supposed to go to the movies, and you understand that about him, then you say, you know what, it's okay. I know that's how you need to relieve your stress. It doesn't mean that you don't care about me. And so understanding people's primary archetypes based on their facial features will give you an understanding of where they need to go when they're stressed, or how they may argue, or how they may think, or how they express love. And it could be different from yours, but that doesn't mean that they have any less commitment to you. It just means it's going to be different than the way you would expect or the way you would want.
Right, exactly. And that's so important for people to understand the differences and then learn how to communicate how they're feeling with someone, because then it changes everything. Instead of it always being a clash, like, well, this person just doesn't get me. Like, well, of course not. You're speaking a different language. You have to translate it for them.
Exactly. And, you know, I've had clients who, you know, the relationship, and also we have to understand that relationships, very much like communication, they change and they flow. And so someone may come into your awareness because they have a certain skill set that at the time you were really craving. And then you build a bond around that. However, when you're not in that same scenario anymore, then that person is naturally going to still behave that way, but your need may be different. And so when our needs are different, then we expect people to change automatically, but they can't necessarily do that. So, for example, I had a couple of clients who came together because she was in a crisis, and he came along, and he was a really great problem solver, and he gave her all of these solutions, and she was so excited about it, and they built a really wonderful bond. A few months down the road, every time she came to him when she was frustrated about something, his natural instinct is to go and problem solve. But the little everyday things that she was just complaining about, or in general talking about, she didn't want a solution for all of those. She just wanted a little bit of a, there, honey, it's going to be okay. But that isn't what his face said about him. His first instinct is always like, oh, you come to me with a problem, I'm going to solve it. Not, I'm going to make you a cup of tea and tell you it's going to be okay. And so it was beginning to put distance between them, and she was getting really frustrated because she's like, I just want him to just hug me. I don't want him to solve this problem. I can solve it. I'm just frustrated right now. So I just said, look at his face. He's a problem solver. He's not a nurturer. And there's some wonderful times for problem solving. But when you need a nurturer, then you go to your girlfriend and you have her make you a cup of tea, and you have the nurturing from her, and then you go to him for the problem solving. And she was like, oh my God, I'm expecting him to be someone naturally that he isn't. But then when she gets what she needs from another source, she's fine. And the relationship blossomed and is thriving. So we have to understand that other people aren't our only source. One person can't be the person we go to for everything. But if we go to them because of the strengths that they have, and we build a network of other people in our lives that can support us in other ways, then we can have really full relationships, and not all the weight of our happiness and our success is on one other person. I think that's part of the challenge that we have in relationships and monogamy. It's not that we can't be monogamous. It's that we can't expect one person to be the only thing we ever need. We have to build a circle.
Right. And that in itself is worth its weight in, let's say, platinum, since like platinum instead of gold. Because you think about how many times someone has this mentality, this notion of, I just want that one person for everything. One person cannot be, let's say, the Walmart of someone's life. Mm-hmm. That there's going to be different people with different skill sets to help with different things.
Yeah. And unless you really understand people, then, I think we all naturally aim to understand each other. It's just who we are. It's human nature. But we are societal creatures for a reason. And so we're not islands, and we don't exist just in pairs, because we have families and we build communities. And so we can give our love and deep affection to one person, but understand that expanding our horizons to have a good friend or some really trusted colleagues or other things doesn't make that person any less important to us. It just gives us all freedom to be more naturally who we are and show up for each other in ways that feel good and that are giving 100%, instead of saying, okay, well, I'm going to do this, but I really don't know how to do it, but I'm going to try. And recognizing the effort and then helping people to understand you, then you can ask them to be more. But don't go under the assumption that somebody naturally is exactly like you, unless you go seeking those features for sure, which you can do, but still life experiences and social environment will come into play as well to some degree. So we're complicated, but wonderful.
Right, exactly. I think that the best analogy that comes to mind when you talk about people building the relationships, like having that nurture and so forth, is think about like a couple of them actually. One is like going to the doctor. You're not going to, say if you're having an eye problem, go to the dentist.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to seek out the specialist, the people who do very specific things. Or you think about sports teams; they have one person can have a multitude of coaches, each with their different specialty, to make them a better person as a whole. There's not the one size fits all. This one person who's going to solve all these things. Well, no, there's specialists in every area.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best things about understanding communication and then understanding relationships, is that if you need to build your relationship team, unless you're playing, unless you're just a marathon runner, right? Then your team is you, but it can become a very lonely existence. But if you want to be part of a team, then you have to put all the right pieces in place. You're not going to build a baseball team and put a back catcher in outfield. He's just not going to be effective in that position. But you put him in back catcher and he's a star, and you put the outfielder in the right position, then you have a cohesive team that can win and work together and support each other. And it's the same in our life. You have, someone who is a nurturer in your life, and then you have someone who is an action taker, and someone who's a confidant, and someone who's, a conscience, and you you have all of those people on your team instead of asking one person to be all of that, and you can build an amazing life team.
Right, exactly. So now, as we begin to wrap things up, what's a resource that people should be considering to learn more about how to leverage facial intelligence in their day-to-day living?
Well, I have a great blog that I post, Fun Fact Friday. I have there where every Friday I post tips on ways to understand different features and different aspects in terms of communication and other people. On my website, I have, especially if someone's looking to find someone, I have a dating guide to help you understand what features to look at when you're looking for the right person. So those are some resources.
Oh, excellent. And what's your website?
It's michellebutt.com.
Okay. Oh, awesome. So now, one last thing here then is, what's one thing that people should be doing day to day to truly maximize their understanding of facial intelligence as they go out and about in the world?
I think one thing is to look in the mirror and see if there are changes. Because when you can see a change, then you can begin to get a clue as to what's going on. So, especially, well, I'll give you a tip, especially for people who are looking at their wrinkles and thinking, well, I don't know what's happening here. And this can be for men or women. I call it the dollar store facelift. Is that when you're alone for a few minutes and say you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle maybe developing around your mouth and you're thinking, where's that coming from? I don't understand it. And maybe I should go see my local plastic surgeon. Just when you're alone, get a piece of Scotch tape and put it across where the wrinkle shows up. And every time you feel that tape pulling, then stop and think, what am I thinking about? What am I feeling? What's going on right now? Because then you'll begin to start getting clues as to what's causing you to make the expression that's carving the wrinkle into your face. And that's where the work will begin. Like, oh my God, every time I think of my ex-husband, I make a frown and now this wrinkle is showing up on my face. What am I feeling? I'm feeling a lot of resentment. Maybe I have to let this go or whatever. Or maybe I need to go talk to a coach or a friend and figure out how to release this in order to stop myself from feeling that way so often that it's beginning to be part of my story and what I'm showing the world.
Wow. Now that is powerful, because who would have thought yet another usage of the classic Scotch tape?
Yeah, there you go.
And especially to reduce and eliminate wrinkles. That's a powerful thing.
Yeah, and instead of spending $10,000 on a facelift, just go spend a little bit on a coach for a few months and do the inner work so that you'll recognize how you're feeling all the time instead of going under the knife, which is, I know the plastic surgeons out there may hate me, but part of the job of healing is to heal the inside as well as the outside. And if you choose to heal the outside by way of surgery, make sure that you're also doing the inner work, because you don't want to continue to feel the same way, because then you're going to defeat the whole purpose.
Right, exactly. Well, Michelle, I want to thank you for coming into the Big Movement podcast and sharing your wealth of wisdom about facial intelligence, relationships, and just how to really communicate more effectively day-to-day in life.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Big Movement Podcast today. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now that you've surely been inspired to take your entrepreneurial career and business to the next level, you can stop by the website and get more. And if you're ready to boost your business brand, be sure to grab your free report, 7 Easy Steps to Build Your Brand Today.